Thank you. Indeed, I'm from the same gang. It's the ESS Module 6. So what I have to do now, probably, in order to avoid repetitions,
just click on so.
Okay, so I'll probably do, in order to save time, most of the things that Alexander and, yeah, in a minute, precisely, I probably will need to look at my graphs here because I'll jump from some slides to the other in order to avoid repetitions. Let me say that this, what I have to say here, comes from at least 3 projects. One is on models of democracy, the second is from the ESS Module 6, and also from the kind of democratic audits or assessments of democracy, like, I mean, I don't tend to use, I don't use the World Bank. I'm more inclined to look at the, for instance, Bertelsmann indexes, be it about transformation or sustainable governments. So let me do the following. I'll start with what I have to say in the conclusions, because it will allow me then to select few of the things that I would like to present. And probably the overall remarks should say the following. Most of what Hans-Peter said and Alexander did say is precisely what I have in my analysis. And I want to make one clear point. I mean, that's very logical, what we see, right? It would have been strange if we all of a sudden saw that it is the Poles, Czechs, Bulgarians, and others that are more satisfied with democracy than Dutch and Swedes. It happens so that they have legitimate reasons to be less satisfied with democracy, period, right? So, secondly, it is astonishing how both our ESS data and other data on democracies, which is what Philippe hates sincerely, the public opinions, what the sovereign thinks about democracy, that seems to him unimportant. Anyway, what you see there is very, very similar to the experts' evaluations of those who are doing the assessment. And the Bertelsmann index, for instance, looks at 45, 65 dimensions of what goes on in these countries. And the results are pretty similar to what people think about these democracies. Secondly, I would just say a little bit to the graphs that Hans-Peter presented indicate, of course, that, well, you can talk about Central and Eastern Europe, but it is equally important to talk about particular countries. The variance within the region is very high, and secondly, the variance in the region in time changes. I mean, those who were the beloved babies of the transformation in the early 90s, today are at the, you know, I mean, they are the laggards of the transformation and the quality of democracy, and those who are not supposed to be on the top are currently, and again, this is not a competition, of course, but if you were to evaluate, I mean, we were so bloody wrong at the beginning of the 90s, right? I can still hear the 3 fundamental, I depart a little bit from what I had to say, but initially when I started in 1990 a so-called project on the social cost of the economic transformation in the 4 Visegrad countries, one of the fundamental assumptions for Poland, for instance, was the following. You are down the drain. Nothing will work in Poland for 3 fundamental reasons, and let me say right from the beginning, all 3 were correct. First, you have this backwarded agriculture. 27% of those who pretend they cultivate land produce 2% of the GDP. Correct, right? I still remember those peasants around the horses plugging the thing. That was the reality in 1989. The second point, a classical Huntingtonian message, the Huntington when he was still writing interesting books back in 1968, right? Political Order in Changing Societies, in which over-mobilization at the expense of institutionalization. Poland was considered to be the failure, predicted to be a failure, because because there was too much of trade unionism, there was big solidarity outside on the streets, and there was very little institutionalization. Again, correct. Until the 2001 election, the trade unions had far, far too much to say in Polish politics. And thirdly, the Catholic Church. Well, my English is probably too poor to say exactly what I would like to say about, but at least, certainly, this institution is not an asset for the democratic transition in Poland, period, again, right? And now, if you look at now, to say the least, Poland is not doing that bad, right? Both on economy and on the political and democratic side. So there must be something else that contributed to this kind of development. And I must say that after computing all kinds of things, I still don't know what it is. So, but as a citizen, I'm fairly happy it develops this way. Okay, the second thing is, something that they did not mention is that we were also preoccupied in this project to see whether the theoretical four models, as we envisage in theory, there is a kind of mirroring of that in the minds of Europeans. So to put it very shortly, no, right? There is much more overlap between the 16, 17 components we look at. Europeans have more mixed and complicated configuration of which aspects of democracy go together and which are separate. Ultimately, we definitely have to, the important component as such is this liberal electoral one, and usually the most important, both normatively and in terms of evaluation of democracy, is the liberal and electoral components, equality before law and free and fair elections. The new phenomenon, and this is something I would like to emphasize, and it comes from another project on the democracy at a critical juncture, is that probably we should spell it out clearly. Schumpeterian vision of democracy, that it is a pure procedural and minimalistic definition, seems to be over, right? More and more Europeans, and not only Europeans, and especially after this crisis, expect more from democracy. We were for years very hesitant to include the outputs of democracy into the kind of broad definition of democracy, but probably this is over. People insist on knowing what kind of products, what kind of outcomes democracies produce. So, and as I say here, the social justice, we have two items in our research project. One is on combating poverty and the other at ameliorating inequalities. Both show that this is important, and most likely it will be for good with us, right? So you probably, we are not anymore able to talk about democracy without referring to this. But if I were to, I have no time to go into particular countries, but it is really astonishing that if you look at Hungarians today, as of 2012, what they value in their democracy and what they are dissatisfied, it is precisely what they should be dissatisfied with. This is rule of law, this is the constitutional tribunal, this is the all kinds of things that we know. If you look at Slovenes, you also see a very distinctive pattern, which is partly was covered here, that they are very much in favor of direct democracy, but also let me remind you, if we jump into these varieties of capitalism, then the message is this is the corporatist type of, if at all, right, type of capitalism that they are constructing in this country, and probably this impact of people who are involved into decision making is important. If you look at the Czech Republic, where Kuponovka was the starting point of this egalitarian type of, I know the ultimate results, but nevertheless, as a socializational tool, the only country in Eastern Europe at the beginning of the transformation to give the citizens the coupons and say, you are at the beginning all equal, you do with it what you like, had an impact. And today, if you look at what Czechs expect from democracy and how they evaluate it, this is clearly logically linked to the egalitarian type of society as compared to the others. Let me remind you, Gini is at the level of 0.24, I think, compared to the Polish 0.31 or Estonian 0.36, if I'm correct. Anyway, if you go to Bulgaria, and this was 2012, of course, Bulgarians had good reasons even not to believe in the free and fair elections in their country. So I would say, if you look at it from the perspective, the kind of things that these East Europeans expect normatively from their democracies and how they evaluate them is also pretty logical, and I would say I have no big surprises. I was using the older data set, so I don't have to deal with Albania here, but probably your explanation of those countries in which there is less democracy is legitimate. Probably a kind of global remark. If you look at these Central and Eastern European countries, they are doing, on average, much better than in other places. If you jump into Latin America, okay, there is Costa Rica, of course, there is Uruguay and Chile, and that's basically it, right? And here comes my new proposal I'm trying to work on, and that's why I'm not that popular recently in Poland, is that probably we should, after 25 years, look into the legacies of real socialism. There must have been something positive in it, right? Maybe the kind of, egalitarian mood, the skilled workforce, relatively diversified industry. I'm afraid to continue what might have been positive because this is still unpopular, but I'm very much inclined to look into this matter because apparently there must have been something. It's not only EU conditionality. With all due respect to EU conditionality, let me also, if I look at my country, I would say that a lot of fundamental changes have been done very early in the transition. We were long way through in 1997, 98 with Balcerowicz reform and other changes in the system, and then only comes the European Union, and then, yeah, well, there are some stipulations, there are these strange things about cheese and milk, and that's why, one of the things is why we were so desperately dissatisfied with democracy at the beginning of the 2004, well, because apparently we have it in other Polish data sets. By 2004, 2 or 3 Polish political parties was extremely successful in persuading Poles, especially the Polish peasant, that this will be a disaster for them. And the curve upward surge 3 or 4 years ago again shows that the experience with joining the European Union was much more positive than we thought. So to conclude, I think, what is it? 2 minutes, 5 minutes? You are generous, I know, but okay. First of all, democratic legitimacy really depends on the daily experiences with its functioning, and what I can show you and what is in the paper, especially in the graphs, is there. Secondly, I think, because I jump from topic to topic, is that these differences between West and East are really, at least in terms of normative expectations towards democracy, they are very, very limited. If I have a chance to show you precise results about this East-West comparison, here they are. Okay. These are the kind of normative expectation in Central and Eastern European countries concerning what is important for democracy. And here you have courts treat everyone the same, national elections free and fair, the governments explain decisions to the voters, and so forth, so on. Finally, this is the Western European table, which you have basically the same result, right? What differs slightly is the evaluation of democracy. Okay, so let me summarize here. The really new, the important thing I draw from this project of ours is that the social justice dimension is very much becoming an important, I would say, a constitutive element of democracies. Indeed, in Eastern Central Europe, in terms of performance on these two issues, the evaluations are very, very negative, I mean low, negative. And if we treat in this our project legitimacy as a difference between the normative expectations and the evaluations, then if delegitimization of a political system would come around in those countries, it would be rather on this economic redistributive issues than the liberal or electoral ones. And well, I think I'll stop here. Maybe I could entertain you later on in the discussion. Thank you.